wait from year to year for these conventions. COVID was a little bit of a hiccup too, so it made us desire these conventions more and more. But this specific session, in my opinion, and obviously based on the way the program was set up, was strategically placed because it is hands down the best session to end with. And the reason I mention this is because if you look at all of the people around you, all of the people who've been fighting for the cause of Palestine in the last 70 years, 70 plus unfortunately, we're always being held by the generations that follow. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-great-parents have instilled in us the passion and the desire and the resistance to fight for Palestine. They have taught us that the homeland is something that is not only overseas and in Palestine, but it lives within us, and it is our goal and our duty to continue to spread that message, not only to other Palestinians and other Muslims, but to other people in our workplaces, in our schools, and then inshallah to our future families. So this session is really important for that particular reason. The people behind me on stage are people who have been working aimlessly and tirelessly to help continue passing on the story of Palestine, passing on the narrative from generation to generation. And it's important that their work gets not only recognized, but amplified in spaces like this. They're here because they are setting an example for you, for your children, for your children's children, and for all of the generations to follow. That being said, this is a discussion-based presentation, so I have questions that have already been pre-prepared, and I'll introduce all of them at once, and then we will start forward with all of the questions. So first up, I have Tasneem Abdullah. She's a Palestinian that's raised in Minnesota, and she has a background in clinical research focused on neurophysiology. She's currently based in Iowa, and she's working on her master's degree in anatomy at the Des Moines University. Tasneem's connection to Palestine rises from her parents and her grandparents. Her grandparents were ethnically cleansed from their village of Tarshisha in 1948. She draws from her experience being a child of refugees and returning to Palestine for the first time in 2015. She currently is a board member of the AMP chapter in Minnesota. Even though she lives in Iowa, she's still been very active with her work. And her start in Palestinian advocacy work was through SJP when she helped establish the University of Minnesota chapter in 2011. She continues her work today for Palestine by engaging and educating the local Muslim community about the movement. Next to her, I have Hafza Habba, Hafza's right here, who is an educator, an activist, and a humanist. She is a Muslim Palestinian American who believes in justice for all, and she graduated from the Rutgers University in Newark with her degree in psychology and cognitive neuroscience. She was an organizer with the Students for Palestine during her time there. Today, she currently works as a research assistant and an educator with a focus on early childhood development. She's also an organizer with the American Muslims for Palestine chapter in New Jersey. In between them is Rifka Falana, who's a second-year law student and a passionate campus organizer. She ties her roots to Safa and Lifta in Palestine, and she was born and raised in Chicago. She graduated with her bachelor's in international studies from DePaul, and while she was at DePaul, she was the president of SJP. She helped reestablish SJP Chicago, where she became the co-chair. Currently, she serves as a student representative for the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine and the National Organization of the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation. As she is in law school, she has founded Bar None, which is a student organization focused on civil rights. She's deeply passionate about civil rights issues and public interest at large, and will be, inshallah, an Ella Baker intern at the Center for Constitutional Rights in the summer of 2022. On this side, we have Bassadan Najjar, who's a Palestinian Syrian American activist from the Connecticut AMP chapter. He's a recent graduate from the University of Connecticut, where he spent the last 4 years working as part of the Students for Justice in Palestine, and the last 2 years he was president. After joining the National Advocacy Day with AMP in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago, he has continued his work with AMP and has been helping build the AMP Connecticut chapter, and he has continued on with his postgraduate activism. And lastly, Osama Ahmed, on the far left, is a Palestinian American born and raised in the Bay Area. He currently leads the AMP Bay Area chapter and is also a chairman of the HAP Action. So please join me in a warm welcome to all of our panelists. So that being said, we have some pre-prepared questions that we have all already heard about and asked. And the point is that they will start some sort of discussion for you to take home and talk about in your own spaces, with your own children and your own families. So, and this is open to whomever. The first question I have for all of you, or for any of you who want to ask is, was there a specific time or instance, either in undergrad or before, that sparked your interest and desire to work for the cause of Palestine?
I'll go first. First off, I'd like to thank AMP for this amazing event and wish, and pray that we have many successful events in the following years. I think for me, the biggest thing was I went to school at UC Irvine I was there in 2011, or I think it was 2010, and one of my close friends was Tahir Hirzallah, who's the current Director of Community Outreach at AMP National, and he was part of the Irvine 11. So I wasn't involved with the Irvine 11. I just heard about it. Things happened, and then 2 days later, we all met up, and what I saw was a group of students who were concerned about Palestinian human rights. Maybe they didn't plan everything so well. That was the perception of the community. But it just amazed me to see that there were a group of students who actually wanted to do something. And out of that came SJP at UC Irvine, and that's how I got involved. And then even well after college, Tahir also kind of pulled me into AMP as well. So I think that for me, it's really the relationships with people that kind of can pull you into these spaces that allow you to be more active.
Once again, like Osama just said, I just want to thank AMP for setting this up, inviting me as a speaker. Really honored to speak. For me personally, I was never in touch with my Palestinian roots when I was younger. I come from West Hartford, Connecticut, which, if any of you know, it's an extremely large population of Zionists over there. In fact, when I was younger, I didn't know until I was like maybe 12 or 13 that I was actually Palestinian. My mom always told me to say that I was Jordanian, either to quell any possible issues or essentially just because she had the nationality of Jordanian as well, I'm not sure. But once I got to college at UConn, I started making more Arab friends, more Muslim friends, and I got involved with SJP. And I learned a lot. I really didn't know that much to begin with before that, but the one event that really changed everything for me was when UConn invited Charlie Kirk. I'm not sure if you guys know him, but he's a Zionist, not the best. They invited Charlie Kirk to come to campus and speak to all the students. And when I went to the event, everybody around me, he was spewing, I knew as much to know that everything was false what he was saying, but I looked around and every single person was eating up what he was saying. They were absolutely loving it. They were taking his flyers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to see how easily misinformation could be spread, like setting like wildfire essentially, that really lit a fire under me. And another event actually recently, we had a protest at UConn, and there was the Hillel, the Israeli organization, came to as well, and they handed out these pamphlets that spewed Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian rhetoric, and everybody once again was eating it up. So just seeing how easily everything spread, see how the ignorant mind could easily latch onto these Israeli lies, that really lit a fire in me and kept me going and got me into all of this.
And for the women over there, was there any event, either from like your personal history, your parents' narrative, your grandparents' narrative, that really pushed you to learn more about the cause or to contribute more towards Palestine?
Yeah, so for me personally, I think it's like really three main things that made me want to organize for Palestine every day, which is one, simply being Palestinian. Being Palestinian, we're many of us here, when we were younger, 5 years old or something, we'd go downtown, get in the buses, and like, be protesting for Palestine. So that was really one of it, being, kind of immersed into the struggle since we were children. Two, my dad was a political prisoner for a small time, but even that small time, the torture is just so heavy that the stories that we're here of like political prisoners and just of our parents and how they undergone the struggle in Palestine. That's the second one. And then third, going to Palestine every summer. That really helps. Going to Palestine, seeing the apartheid wall, seeing the separate roads, seeing the disparities and how your family is treated versus how Israelis are treated, 100% makes me want to organize even more for Palestine. And I think those three things mainly pushes me every day to do this work.
For those who were at Linda Sarsour's lecture yesterday, she mentioned that third point, that taking your families home to Palestine is one of the biggest investments you could do for your children. You show them everything in Palestine. They see with their own two eyes what the injustice looks like, what the humanitarian crisis looks like. They learn to appreciate the steadfastness of those who are living there. And then they also start to light the passion within themselves to either continue to go back to Palestine if they're able to, but to at least continue to work for the cause. So for those parents out there who really think taking your kids back to Palestine, that honestly is probably one of the best investments you could do for your children. Because for those of us who have been back to Palestine, the desire and that passion to go back to our homeland and to see our roots is something that is forcing us to continue for the cause.
100%.
Can I add to that one thing? So I actually never had the opportunity to go to Palestine because my dad was, he had refugee papers and there was no way they're gonna ever let him in. And once we came here, it was just too difficult for us to try and go back. And so if you don't have that opportunity, I still feel like my parents did a great job in instilling that Palestinian identity. And so for us, we always knew, I grew up always knowing that I was Palestinian. Whereas some of my friends kind of relate to Bassadan, they thought they were Lebanese until 6th grade. But my parents just instilled that within us from day one and kind of brought us into the conversation, had us watch the news with them, explain things to us, explained our history to us, because just being part of the diaspora, I have 70 cousins and I haven't met 50 of them because we live all over the world, and I haven't gotten to meet my grandparents, and so they took it on to pass that history down to us and to pass that cultural identity down to us. So if you're not able to take your kids back to Palestine, you can still do it from here, and you can still, because it is a huge financial burden, and it is there's a ton of barriers in the way, and we don't even have families still there because they were all exiled in 48. So there's still ways to instill that Palestinian identity within them, even from here and even in the, wherever you are in the diaspora.
Can I add something? So I just want to add two things. The first is I first went to Palestine in 2017 through a trip, through an A&P trip. They did a delegation. So if anyone is interested in visiting Palestine, I highly recommend maybe reach out to A&P to see if you can go on the delegation. The second thing is, it's not really it's just something that I've observed is a lot of people, if parents want to take their children back to Palestine, I think it's great that they go visit, if they're, they can go visit their cousins and attend a wedding. But there's a difference between visiting family and touring and seeing the occupation and seeing the apartheid. So this is something that I think we need to really stress, because I have a lot of friends that are able to go back to Palestine, and all they tell us is, Ramallah is really fun. We just went to this wedding, and we did this, we did that, because there's areas in the West Bank it's actually the occupation is actually shielded from them on purpose, so they don't think about it. But if you go to Khalil, if you go to Bethlehem, if you go to Al-Quds, if you're able to go to Al-Quds, I think it's vital that your children see that experience. And it could be traumatizing to a certain extent, but it's something that will allow them to come back and have some sort of response, a channeled response to ending the occupation.
Along the lines of taking your children, taking your families back to Palestine, what other things can we do within our family circles, within our communities or our friend groups,
that can help continue the cause and continue the fight for Palestinian activism?
I think I'll answer this one. Me and Tasneem were actually talking about this yesterday, and so when we talk about having, families or children get involved in activism, we always think about, them doing it alone. And so I think it's important for families to understand that, getting involved doesn't mean that each person needs to get involved on their own. So like educating yourselves as a group, educating yourselves as a family is something that's very important, and it means so much, because not only connecting yourself to your heritage, if you are Palestinian, even if you're not Palestinian, understanding the roots of Palestine, understanding the different perspectives of, the Palestinians of 48, Palestinians of 67, and, the refugees and the people who still live there. It's important to know each different perspective and to understand the different areas where activism is important. And so I think that, getting involved as a family is not only, not leaving the children, alone and unsupervised, but then also everybody's learning together. So I think it's important, to get active as a family, so then there's support, not only from the family, but then also, encouragement.
I have practical advice. Since we are a panel of youth, I think one of the biggest things that the youth can have is financial support. Our opponents on campus have so much money that's ridiculous. But I think one thing, depending on your capacity, one thing is join an organization. But of course, if you cannot join an organization, giving money to organizations who are doing good work. In Chicago especially, we have so many Palestinian organizations, and shout out SJP Chicago. We're doing a lot of great work, but a lot of that great work can't happen if we aren't having constant donations coming in. So depending on what you can do, if you don't have the capacity to join in organizations and do the grassroots, at least give money to those who can, I think.
And for those who are unaware, a lot of what drives the Zionist movement is multi-million-dollar corporations and donations that come from people that are constantly funneling this money into youth groups, organizations. Miko Paled mentioned it yesterday as well, where they grow up in these communities and they are so forcibly taught Zionism because that's all the agenda is, and that agenda is driven financially. So as mentioned, if you do have the financial capacity and ability to donate, that is what will help shift the narrative. People underestimate how much your money goes in situations like this, but if you look at the success of all of the movements before us, where we are, the Palestinian movement is basically a grassroots movement, but our opponents are always successful before because of the financial capacity that they have. What about in terms of the youth that are here or the parents of youth that are here? What things do you have to say to them, to their parents, or maybe even to people who have finished school and are in that awkward phase of their life where they haven't yet built families of their own, but they're not involved in SJP because they've been out of college for a bit?
I would say one thing. I'm still in touch with my SJP chapter, even though I graduated, and the one thing I always help them whenever I come in, the number one thing you have to do is not be scared. The people, like the saying goes before, it's the bully that's actually the insecure one. That's what Israel is. They put these scare tactics on us just to scare us, even though they're the ones that are actually scared. Once you put in the energy, once you put in the effort, there's truly nothing you can't do in terms of moving the narrative. I mean, support is fantastic, but you yourself can do so much. Rallying, BDS, setting up demonstrations. Once you're not scared, you'll see that we want the hype, we want the energy, we want the smoke eventually, because Dr. Linda Sarsour over here, I don't know, actually, I don't know if she's here, but she's the walking definition of what you should aspire to be. She's confident, strong, unapologetic, all of that, yes, but wherever she goes, she makes headlines, she makes things happen, like at UConn, where she was denied access to speaking, except specific conditions. Or at UMass, where she was attempted to be sued just for coming in. She comes in and she lives the Palestinian embodiment of courage, of not being scared. Because let me tell you one thing, whenever you see a Zionist, they don't want opposition. If you listen to a Zionist and a Palestinian speak, all they're going to do is they've been trained to consistently ask questions because they don't have any concrete evidence as to what they're talking about. They're the ones that are scared. They're the ones that are consistently going to be able to try to poke holes in what you say, poke holes in what you do. But if you stay steadfast and stay not scared, there's nothing you can achieve, honestly.
Now, one thing that, in order to be confident, you need to have is the knowledge about Palestine. You need to know about your roots. You need to know about the history. You need to be able to sit there and think and list of all of the facts about what happened with the Nakba, how Palestine is the way it is today. What about all of the old cities? I hate to say forgotten cities, but the old cities that were wiped away because of the Nakba. What resources do you know about or do you have that we can share so that other people can learn and have this insurmountable amount of knowledge that they can use to talk about Palestine?
So, a couple of resources. The first book that's a must-read is The Question of Palestine by Edward Said. That's the number one book that you would want to read to understand the false narrative of the Zionists and what really happened. The second is The Ethnic Cleansing of the Palestinians by Ilan Pape. And then for resources, there's a lot of resources online. I think actually Palestine Remembered is actually a really good resource. Unfortunately, the usability is not so great, but it's an amazing resource in terms of information. And the last thing really is Electronic Intifada and Mondawais, in my opinion, are actually really good websites to just gain an understanding of what's happening in the universities and the schools and the communities. So I think those resources baseline are good, and then you also should definitely probably read the New York Times, the Washington Post, not because you agree with them or you disagree with them 100%. You have to know how liberals are trying to counter-argue and then diffuse the issue of Palestine. So I think those resources, just off the top of my head, would be really good ones to start with.
Yeah, of course, those resources, but then also AMP. AMP has multiple social media pages, and we know Zarifa and Malak, take care of that very, very well. And so they, we often have news that you guys can look at. But then also we spoke about like older cities. And so for history, there are history sources on the AMP website, but then also there's a very detailed and very descriptive timeline from PAL Journeys. So you'll probably search paljourneys.org, and you can find a timeline in English and in Arabic it dates back to, I think, about the 1500s. And so you'll find from 1500s to current, well, maybe not current, I think about 2016 that you'll find on there. So, but those are very, very good resources.
Palestine Ambassadors is really good, like as a website, because it breaks it down by like time period, and it delves like all the way back to 1800s, and it's all like documentaries and like movies based on books and stuff. So I highly recommend Palestine Ambassadors.
There's also it's called decolonizingpalestine.com or .org. That's a new one, and it's very great. It gives myth, history, current events, and that's a really good one.
And just one more I'd add is ifamericans.com. It's a great resource to give statistics and also personal stories, which is really what drives things. People see the number of people that are killed or the number of cities that are demolished, and they don't connect to that. They connect to the personal stories. So as a lot of those, and also talking to people that are before you is obviously extremely helpful as well.
It's really hard for people to dispute fact, right? When you have a solid number and you say, in this time in Palestine, 548 villages were ethnically cleansed. And when you list the massacres that happened, for people who have a heart, they can at least understand that what happened was completely indespicable and complete abomination of human rights. Now, how about when you're having conversations with Zionists in the workplace, where your job might be on the line, or people who might be out to get you, especially if you're applying to graduate school or you're trying to get a career in a certain field where you know a lot of it might be Zionist-driven or Zionist-supported. How do you handle these conversations, if you've faced any of them? But how do you handle that to not only bring forth the topic of Palestine, but to also talk about it in a way that shows the plight of the Palestinian people?
I have a personal story that happened to me last spring. When I was creating my organization, Bar None, it's a civil rights organization at my law school, we put in the mission statement that we're against Islamophobia, Zionism, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and a bunch of isms, right? And so it's a law school, very Zionist institution. Right off the bat, we got called out. Zionist students were reporting us to the dean. 2 professors wrote hate mails to us. I had to have a meeting with 3 of the deans. And in the meetings, I knew that, I'm gonna say my story. I knew that I would be coming in. They're either gonna take it, they're probably not. Of course they're not, but I still wanted to say my story. But I also felt like I needed to double down. I didn't want to say, they're like, why don't you change the word Zionism and put this, this, this? And I'm like, no, thank you. And so you have to sit in those. You have to explain yourself, but even if they don't understand your explanation, because they're not gonna, they want the money, they want the Zionist money, and so I just feel like you have to double down on you. You can't be wavering when you are trying to promote Palestine. Like, if you are, then you'll just be kind of taken down with the wind. But yeah, so.
Also, we had a session in the CAT program, and Sister Linda Sarsur gave us a little bit of an idea of when I think you in your question you mentioned workplaces or areas or people who are not accepting of it, and so not getting accepted into something, and so the way Linda said it was straight up, if they are going to make you waver your beliefs, they're going to make you back down on the things that you believe in, the things that you stand for, you don't want to be there in the first place. If your job there or your acceptance to that place or that scholarship is contingent on you backing down, you don't want that in the first place, because then you're wavering, and then that means, or you're backing down, and then you're taking a piece of yourself every time. So are you going to continue to, make yourself a smaller person so you can fit a puzzle piece? Are you trying to fit in, or are you going to be different? And I think that was very powerful.
Now, for people who, let's say, don't have Arabic-speaking names or who don't look visibly Palestinian, like I myself, I could go under the radar everywhere I go if people only heard my name, but it's until they see me that they know I'm Muslim. And unless I purposefully mention I'm Palestinian, there's no way for people to know. Do you think it's our responsibility when we enter a new community or a new workplace or a new circle that we announce our Palestine identity, that we let people know who we are and where we're from? Or do you think it's something that can continue to sort of stay under the radar, get where we need to be, become successful in our field, and then at that point, let the world know you're Palestinian?
I think it's just a personal preference at the end of the day. I don't think you should hide it just to make others feel comfortable, because they're never going to be comfortable with us. It doesn't matter, Palestinian or not. You're walking in with a hijab, you're walking in, with a name like Muhammad, and it doesn't matter where you're from. They're just gonna, I don't know. I really don't think making other people comfortable won't get you any further in life than just being who you are. Because at the end of the day, I honestly, genuinely, when we talk about blacklisting, or we talk about doxing and whatnot, and a lot of people really get stressed out about it, because it's okay, well, what if I don't get the job? What if I don't move up? What if I don't get the promotion? At the end of the day, your rizq is 100% in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter what you do, no matter what, who's sitting on the other side of that interview, if that job is meant for you, if that promotion is meant for you, you're gonna get it. So don't worry about making other people comfortable. Just worry about doing what you're doing, and doing it for whatever intention you're doing it, and hopefully that intention is a good intention, and just keep living your life in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you'll be rewarded for it in ways that you won't expect. So just worry about yourself.
And then just to wrap up, we don't have much time left, but the one question that I absolutely love asking people is, and I'll answer too. What does a liberated Palestine look like to you? What does it feel like for you? And for me, I have my roots to Gaza City, which unfortunately I can't always get into because of the occupation and the oppression. Palestine to me, and a free Palestine, a free Palestine, is being able to go from Gaza City to the Quds in one day and back without stopping at a single checkpoint, and then being able to go to Ariha and Al Khalil and do a nice little Palestine road trip without having any checkpoints, seeing the historic Palestine, and being reunited with my family. And then inshallah one day we can do a AMP conference on the liberated lands of Palestine. So if you can all go and answer what a free Palestine or a liberated Palestine looks like to you.
I mean, for me, it's, the personal touch is, my family's from Lid, so it's for my parents, my cousins, my relatives to be able to go back and to live there, and just like you said, to travel freely, not see any checkpoints, to see that, Palestinian children can actually dream and live the future that they've always wanted to live.
So I would say seeing a free Palestine is seeing a place where my mom can go home. My mom hasn't been back in 5 decades to Palestine, worried about problems about getting in, worried about problems about getting out as well. So seeing a place where my mom can go back, seeing a place where my aunts and uncles can come and go freely, where my family can come to my wedding, seeing a place where Palestinians can essentially, the only reason I do this stuff is to see the Palestinians just to be free just as we are, essentially. So freedom, honestly.
So I'm not going to give my personal, but I want to actually give a few of the examples. So we had this question actually in the CAP program. And so a few of the students were giving their perspectives or even their own stories. And so a lot of them were they really just want a liberated Palestine, freedom of movement, basic human rights. And so one example that they gave was being able to go out for dinner as a whole family, or being able for everybody in the family to attend a whole wedding instead of leaving somebody at home to watch the house. Being able to travel freely, or visit family members in different cities, or friends in different cities, attending school or going to the hospital in peace. Also, another example that somebody gave was how they have land, and so they aren't allowed to reach, their trees or the zri'a, that they can't take care of it, basically. Because if they were to enter that area of their land, they would get shot, or they would get, packed up, or worse maybe. And so they want to do gardening work, It's just really the simple things, and I thought that was, really beautiful, and I really want to share that.
Yeah, you guys basically took the answer right out of my mouth. I was smiling throughout all of it. But yeah, when I think of a free Palestine, I think of the apartheid wall, I think of the separation roads, I think of the checkpoints all destroyed. The signs that say that, it's dangerous for Israelis because Palestinians live there, all of that destroyed is when I think of a free Palestine. And just for Palestinians to be treated with dignity, honestly. But yeah.
So one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is kind of like, where could we have been had there not been an occupation? I went to a Scientists for Palestine conference last year, sometime, I don't know, before the pandemic, and the presenters were all from Palestine, well, not all, but a lot of them were from Palestine, and they were absolutely brilliant. Like, the ways that they just, are so creative and innovative in, the worst conditions humanly possible, just makes you stop and think of, where could we have been had there not been this awful, violent, occupation. And so for me, thinking about, a liberated Palestine, I think about Palestinians reaching their full potential, thriving, and just being the brilliant people that they are. And they are already all of these things as, under occupation, but I just cannot wait to see it go to a whole new, different level once, inshallah, Palestine is liberated.
And mashallah, even through the occupation, even through the limited resources, even through the lack of publicity about what's going on in Palestine, the Palestinians that are across the world, and the Palestinians even in America, are incredibly successful, right? You think they have some of the highest literacy rates around the world, some of the most educated people. We are not yet, unfortunately, in areas of immense influence, but we're starting to, right? We're entering government, we're entering in fields that actually have more of an impact than we could have ever imagined. And mashallah, even through all of that, in the last 70 years, the narrative of Palestine has continued to shift to be something that we talk about more openly, we talk about more freely, and we help bring dignity to our own people, right? When you enter these spaces, when you enter these workforces, these college campuses, and you bring awareness to the topic of Palestine, you're not only doing that for yourself, and you're not only doing that for your cause, but you are doing that for the people who are living in Palestine who cannot speak up or speak out for themselves. I am always reminded by the stories of my family who told me back in Palestine, back in Gaza, you couldn't even wave the Palestinian flag on your own land. That's like, I want you to imagine Americans here not raising, I mean, that's so unpatriotic. And they had to live through this occupation, and they continue to, and they found ways to show their Palestinian nationalism, right? That's why we joke about the batikh, or the watermelon, being the Palestinian national fruit, because it has all the colors of Palestine. That's why women would sew the Palestinian flag onto their thwab, onto their tatriz thobs, to help instill that narrative and that culture. And with all of that that's going on, and with these amazing group of people and the whole program that we've had throughout this entire conference, it is something that I can say, inshallah, obviously with Rabbana subhanahu wa ta'ala's help, but we will see a free Palestine in our generation. We're moving forward with it. The media has shifted, the narrative has shifted entirely. People are becoming more aware of the atrocities of Israel. They're becoming more aware of the humanitarian crisis and the limited resources, and as Zarifa was talking about yesterday night, the limited water access and the limited electricity that everywhere else is considered a basic human right. But now that more people are becoming aware of it, more people are willing to fight for the cause, to help really shift and to help fight for a liberated Palestine. So inshallah, maybe next year, who knows, but hopefully sometime in our lifetime, we would love to have an AMP conference on liberated Palestine with all of our land back, with the right of return for every single Palestinian who has been unfortunately kicked off of their land because of the Nakba or the occupation. And with that, I would like to close the program for the night and let you know that we have our entertainment in this room at 8:45, but I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming to the AMP 14th Annual Conference. It was a pleasure having you in Chicago, and we hope to see you here next year. Thank you.